And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. Excited today to dive into the topic of how to navigate the AI revolution and have on a good friend and an individual that pastors, but also has a lot of history in the tech industry, the gaming industry, has an expertise in this area. Looking forward to having him share with the audience. So Pastor David Beatty, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Josh, it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I wanted to dive in and just ask a little bit of your intro, but your background as well, and perhaps a recent highlight from your work in ministry. And as you do that, I wanted to kind of throw the big idea out there for Christians, and something we've talked about before. We had 2 podcast episodes in the fall, but generally helping Christians understand and utilize new technology for the advancement of the kingdom of Christ, the furtherance of their light and witness to our brave new world. So instead of kind of shrinking back from all these new technologies, how can we steward them well? David, please jump in, share a little bit about your background and perhaps a recent success story in your ministry.
Yeah, so I pastor Calvary Baptist Church in New Braunfels, Texas, and I'm the son of a pastor. My dad pastored this church before I did. So we've been at Calvary Baptist Church now for 30 years. I graduated from the little ACE Christian school that was associated with the church, and then went on to get my bachelor's degree and my master's degree from Pensacola and Liberty, respectively. And now I'm pastoring, as I said, the church. I've been pastoring now for 10 years, and my kids are going to the school. My son recently graduated, but my daughter goes to the same school that I went to. And I do this bivocationally. So we have 2 great staff folks at the church that run the day-to-day operations, and that frees me up to just focus on preaching and also, my day job, my work.
And do you have just a recent highlight, anything that happened recently in this space or even just at the church? I know you've had a very successful spring.
Yeah, we had an Easter egg drop. So if you don't know what that is, there's a small helicopter that hovers over the church facilities, drops eggs, kids run and pick up eggs. And we live in a community that's growing very, very quickly, and so there's a lot of young families. And for a church our size of around 150, we had over 2,000 people on campus, and it was it went smoothly. Like from an administrative, operational standpoint, everything went great. Everyone that came on campus got an invitation to church. They found out about our school. They got an invitation, a salvation message. And then that Sunday, the day after the egg drop, which would be Easter, we had, there's 3 or 5 families that came out of that. And some of those are still sticking around today. So that's pretty cool. That's a way that we can use our property as a community outreach and bring people on campus versus sometimes going off campus.
It was such an honor to be there last year and to see, as you said, I mean, the world's coming to you. I mean, those housing complexes being built around, and it was tempting to come from Indiana to Texas for that egg drop. That would have been a lot of fun. So it's great to hear about that development. So I wanted to dive in. I want to talk about how do we navigate this AI revolution, or really just kind of this next iteration of technological development. And so I wanted to start kind of in the metaverse because a few years ago I heard more about this, and I would heard of law firms actually developing in the metaverse, where people would have on these goggles, they would go to the metaverse, they would kind of live there, do a lot of their life there, maybe Ready Player One, if you're familiar with that storyline of folks basically living in the virtual world. Where is that particular effort? Has that changed forms at all? So how should we think about the metaverse?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting topic. So I've worked in high-tech companies, and I've most recently worked at Meta to help advance the metaverse. So Horizon Worlds on your mobile phone is something that our team actually developed. And it's really interesting because it's a great concept. Everyone kind of going into this virtual space and socially interacting with each other, becoming friends and hanging out. And it hasn't really panned out just like that so far for Meta. But ultimately, I think 2025 is going to be a critical year for the metaverse. They don't have the traction today, but Meta will figure this out. And eventually it's going to be a place, a world, a social world where people actually during the day look forward to entering into. And I know there are several churches that are online. You can put quotes around it, whether or not it's really a church, but it's a gathering of 20 people every Tuesday every Tuesday evening they get together, same people, they have a devotional, they sing songs, they talk about their week, they have prayer requests. And it's really weird, like Josh, because you're not in a real world, but when you put on the VR glasses and you enter into these spaces, it is completely natural to interact with people the way you would in real life. So I anticipate the metaverse, like this year's a turning point. I expect Meta to continue to be heavily involved in this because it's not just a social platform, but it's a revenue stream for Meta and for creators. And if you're familiar with Roblox and Minecraft, billions of dollars are being made by creators who are creating outfits, building worlds that people want to purchase or subscribe to. And it's going to be a revenue stream for people, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And it's a great way to make economic advancement in some countries that are relatively or very poor.
But it certainly raises a host of ethical questions. You mentioned, well, is a virtual church really a church? And certainly if folks are gathering anywhere that people can gather, I think if they're not excluding maybe their in-person gathering in their local church, anywhere we can minister is wonderful. I know, and even in Ready Player One, they kind of tease this idea of you could create an avatar of yourself that is very different from who you are, even a different sex, and you're creating this kind of alternate persona rather than living in the real world. I could certainly see that. But then I imagine many parents, to maybe they're familiar with Horizon Worlds, but also certainly Roblox, certainly Minecraft, Fortnite, and so you've worked in this high tech world. You've worked in the kind of gaming world. What are your thoughts for first of all, I'd say maybe gamers, those young people and even older. I know this isn't just one generation, but for gamers, thoughts on, is this a way to minister to others? Is it a poor stewardship of time? And then maybe we'll pivot over to parents.
Yeah, so is it a waste of time? That's a really, really important question. These games, so we're talking about like the metaverse, Horizon Worlds, Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, and it's really the entire platform of games today, even like Red Dead Redemption and others that have a particular storyline that you follow, but you're also able to interact with AI people or real people. So a recent study came out that said 70% of teens go play video games just to socialize. So that's kind of interesting. It's like, well, why wouldn't you just do it in real life, right? Why don't you just go down the street and talk to somebody? But they have access to tons of people who have a like interest and a shared interest in this video game. And they get on at certain times and they hang out with one another. So it's a way for young people to make friends. It's a way to build teamwork. It also gives people a sense of belonging. And I know this just blows all of our minds, like when we talk about like, wait, that's a video game. Like you shouldn't be wasting time on this. There's going to be a balance. There needs to be a balance because our kids can't just sit in front of a screen all day long interacting with people on games. They need to be balancing that with interacting with people in real life. And I think that's kind of where church comes into play. But I think that, is it a waste of time? It's a tool that can be used poorly or used correctly. And I think as I've seen teens in our own church and even seen teens in these games, they're actually, many of them are really very bold and effective witnesses in these worlds. And a lot of the people that play these games are agnostic or atheist. And I've seen through Discord chats and through these video games, many Christian young people who are taking a bold stance for Christ, arguing apologetically while they're playing video games, which is kind of cool.
That's amazing. And I probably would not be very effective because I'd be so focused on not dying on a particular level to be able to do that well. So, yeah, not just coming at it with a one-size-fits-all, certainly everything in measure and good measure and considering time management, but also seeing it for the ministry outlet that it can be. And so for parents, maybe what are some thoughts there? I mean, certainly we know that some of the smartest engineers in the world present company included, as we talked, are creating these games to be addictive. And so how should they think about time limits and stewarding it well, while also maybe encouraging that evangelistic activity?
Yeah, everything in moderation. This is going to be, you'll have to get down to the individual level with the kid, with your teens or even your young teens. Like you'll have to, I'm going to recommend a book toward the end here that might help with this question. But if you find your son or your daughter obsessing about the video game throughout the day, or they're not talking to people because they're thinking about what they're going to do when they get home and get on the video game, that's the time where parents can come alongside of their kids and try to disciple them. And one of the best ways to disciple is to force restraint. Like there are ways that you can block certain IPs and certain websites through your Wi-Fi, and maybe it's setting up a time frame, like 2 hours a night, or 3 hours or 4 hours on the weekend. That is your allotted time for when you can get on there. And I think what that does is it forces kids to use the time more for value than just kind of boredom. Like they're going to go in there and they're going to find their friends, they're going to coordinate all this stuff, and they have a block of time that they're going to spend. Versus a kid maybe that has 8 hours that just sits in front of it all day long, and they're maybe getting into things that they shouldn't be getting into. So it's very similar to like giving your kid access to the internet, right?
That's helpful, and I think that's very practical. This is where a lot of parents sit right now. Pivoting over to artificial intelligence. Of course, everything comes with an AI label these days, even if it's not technically that. It's certainly a selling point. And I was just looking at a few recent developments and just how quickly this is growing. I was reading about Google DeepMind introduced a new AI system. It can create novel algorithms. I have Microsoft Copilot and then Grok 3. It's like 10 times more computing power than its predecessor. And so it seems like everything continues to go up and to the right with the processing power, and it's just going to be something that we live in and work with. So I just fumbled through a couple of developments, but what is the latest as you're studying this space, working in it, and then kind of where is it headed, do you think, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, if we could maybe even break that down into 4 buckets. I think one is virtual reality and augmented reality. That's coming very quickly by 2028. VR may still be an emphasis, but it's augmented reality that is really going to capture everybody's attention. And that's basically wearing glasses that have AI built into them. And it's seeing what you see, it's describing what you see, it's recording, your day, it's recording what you're saying, and you're talking to it like a personal assistant. I think that's going to happen very quickly within the next few years with a heads-up display basically on your glasses. Then there's kind of the other developments around autonomous vehicles and bipedal robots. Everyone's kind of watching this. We're not quite sure how it's all going to play out, but Austin, which is just north of New Braunfels, will be, by the end of this year, will be offering autonomous taxi rides through downtown Austin. So basically it pulls up, the door opens, there's no one in there, you get in, and it drives you to where you need to go. Very similar to what Waymo is doing in San Francisco and LA, I think. But the interesting thing is that the autonomous vehicles are being developed by the same person who's developing bipedal robots and the same person that's developing their own AI. So I think by 2030, we're going to see a convergence in all of these various formats where you're going to have a physical robot that costs less than $30,000 who can drive your vehicle to the store, buy groceries, get in the car, and drive back, all powered by super advanced artificial intelligence. So generally speaking, there's 4 buckets for this, right? There's the AR, VR, there's the humanoids, there's the self-driving vehicles, and then there's the AI stuff that is powering it all. So I should click down a little bit on the AI stuff, but essentially 2030 will be an entirely different world than the world that we live in today. And in some form or fashion, it's scary. Another side, it's exciting. Like there's predictions that people that are alive today will live to be 150 because of the advancements of AI in the medical industry. By 2030, the top surgeons will be robots, not humans. By 2030, I believe they're predicting 20% of cities will ban cars, and you'll just be able to drive, ride in autonomous vehicles. So all the things that you see in movies may be coming to pass in the next couple of years.
There was an interesting article recently about the right to drive, and do you have a right to drive? And all the statistics show that humans are very bad at driving. I mean, I say that like we're very bad, and it's tragic at how bad we are at driving. And so you could see some arguments there, like, hey, this particular AI-driven software, there's 0 accidents versus this.
And way more efficient too, right? There's going to be people driving in the fast lane slowly. They're all going to drive the speed limit.
I'm just wondering about you're there in Texas. I'm here in Indiana. And you can't take my guns and you can't take my Ford pickup truck.
That's right. That's right.
We'll see how that goes down. But certainly we can see that coming. Now, how will this impact pastors and ministry leaders? The podcast goes out to a lot of church leaders, committed Christians that want to impact their communities. And so there are a lot of things that we could go into, but maybe just as practically as you can, how do you think this massive change in the next 5 to 6 years will impact them?
Yeah, let's maybe drill down on the AI aspect and how that will impact churches and the ministry leaders. So AI today, or by the end of 2025, will be as smart as any one individual human. So a person of average IQ, so 120, 121, whatever it is. So by the end of this year, the AI that you have in your pocket or on your computer will be relatively as smart as you are. And that means you're going to be able to ask it questions. It's going to give you really great answers in return. 2025 is the year of agentic software and agents. And there's a big push. Even yesterday, OpenAI announced they have a software engineer bot that they're selling. By the end of this year, most coding, maybe at least 50% of coding that is done by technology companies will be done autonomously by AIs, which is, a huge industry shift, especially for these very high-paying jobs, right? And so by the end of this year, I think pastors should look to really learn this, because they will have a junior assistant in their pocket that can keep track of their day, that can remind them of conversations they had, yesterday and tasks that they need to get done today. It's going to make pastors like super efficient. In fact, I have a little thing here. This is called Rewind AI, I believe. And what it does is I wear it as a pendant around my neck in my shirt, and it records my conversations all day long. So 12-hour battery life, it's capturing all of my conversations. Now, as an attorney, you'll be happy to know that people have to opt into the conversation. So if they say in real time, I consent to letting my voice be recorded, then it will record their voice. If not, it doesn't record their voice, or it doesn't store what they're saying. But it's essentially like a diary. So every day I take it, plug it into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT knows a little bit more about me. Now, there's tons of fluff on it, right? There's a movie that I'm watching. There's the casual conversations that really don't amount to anything that are getting put into there. But it's helping my AI become more and more intelligent and knowing who I am, what I have going on. Because when you have a brain this big, it's going to be able to draw some conclusions and help you in ways that you never thought possible. So 2025, I think pastors should really try to jump on board and learn AI as quickly as they can, because it's going to be a help to you personally. And there are a couple different ways, right? A sermon preparation. I know maybe a couple years ago, everybody was up in arms about the thought of using AI. But I think now pastors on the sly have jumped on there and have found that AI is great for research. It has all the commentaries that have ever been produced in its neural network, right? It can refer to, it can draw conclusions about different passages maybe that you hadn't thought about but was found in some obscure Puritan writing, 600 years ago. It's a great Hebrew and Greek word study analyst, and it'll get into the weeds with you on that. So it's a great tool for sermon preparation or just deep study in Scripture. And what that means for the average lay leader or lay person is that they should see their pastors maybe developing and preaching a little bit more meaty, substantive messages, or figuring out ways to be a little bit more creative. We as pastors can spend hours looking for just the right introduction story or the right conclusion story or song, something that brings the message together. And we can spend tons of time doing that. Well, with AI, you can just give it the scenario, and it will check every newspaper that has ever existed across the world and give you back an illustration that might be a perfect fit.
So certainly for pastors using it as a tool, but I'm also thinking just the efficiency aspect of it. And it is just a few years ago, nobody would perhaps admit that they were using ChatGPT. Now, most pastors I talk to, hey, I ran that outline through. And I mean, if you're just taking that outline and preaching it, that's a problem. But if you're using it as a tool, like you would use a commentary, I think that makes a ton of sense. Well, I wanted to run through just a few use cases of, how can the movement of believers that we call the church, the Big C church, how can we use it effectively? And then what are some things that, as this develops as a technology, the church's role has always been to be the conscience of our society. And so what are a few things where maybe we need to say, hold on a second, maybe we should think about that one. But let's start with just some positive use cases. And, I had thought a little bit about maybe Bible translation. I know Answers in Genesis is creating some sort of virtual Israel tour where you could go like the time of Christ. We talked about sermon prep and some medical advancements, but maybe drill down into just a few of those that you've been thinking about.
Yeah. So I'll give something positive, but it's also negative. The top reason in 2025 for people using AI is for companionship and friendship. This indicates that people are lonely, and the people that they do talk to, they don't feel like they can bring their whole selves to the conversation. They're afraid of judgment. They're afraid of it showing up on social media. So the number one reason people are using it today is so that they have someone that they can talk to. Now, it's not real. It will simulate emotions, and it can simulate complex thoughts, and it can ask great questions as a counselor would. But it's not a human, right? And there's a whole movie about this called Her with Joaquin Phoenix, came out 10 years ago. So I think what AI is doing is it's giving us an understanding that people need friends and friendships. And if our churches can really think more deeply about how we can provide opportunities for socialization in real life without necessarily always the instruction, I think that would be an amazing counter to what we're seeing in AI. And to maybe drill down a bit more, it's getting people together and going bowling and not preaching to them for 40 minutes, right? It's just hanging out with people and developing those kinds of friendships, because it will be really easy for people to just watch church services on YouTube and interact with their personal agent and feel complete in and of that. And that's not the way God designed us, right?
I've reflected over the last few years on just the importance of the image of God. And long-time listeners to the podcast, so I talk about it all the time. But it truly is what underlies our efforts in the public square. Because if we're doing that, we are bringing God's principles to bear in an institution He created, but also we can be confident it's good for all people. And this movement, everything's digitized. You have a personal assistant. You have the AI chatbot to encourage you. You've left out the image of God completely, and that the unique fact that we're made in God's image, that we need that companionship, that is something the church offers when the world's going to be pushing, get your virtual assistant. So I'm glad you said that. It's confirmed something I've been thinking about, and of course, that's just the church being the church, right? But something we should definitely emphasize. So that's go ahead.
And another piece of that, if you don't mind, that people will craft their agent to be perfect and not make mistakes and not annoy it, right? And the reason we get together in church is for the very fact that we are all different, and we have to learn patience, perseverance, and love for one another. If you think through the pastoral epistles in the New Testament, how many of them are dealing with interpersonal relationship issues and how to correct those interpersonal relationship issues. The correction today for many Christians is to drop out of church because you don't want to be around people that are imperfect, right? Or you don't want to be around people that annoy you. And the next step to that, at least in the next generation, is to just be isolated with your own agent that basically feeds you what it thinks you want it to hear, and without any of the constraints or friction that come with real life. So I think one of the reasons the Lord has us to gather as a church is for us to understand that we are all different, yet we're all created in God's image, and we all are to extend grace to one another the way Christ extended grace to us. And that's a huge lesson that especially young people, teenagers, have to learn today, is forbearance with other people that maybe annoy them, right?
That's so true. And I think maybe we had talked about this before. I mean, that AI is one of the highest forms of man's creativity, reflecting the fact that we're sub-creators. But if we're not careful, it also leads to maybe some of the greatest hubris in the sense that you're creating an AI that almost perfectly images yourself. Right. And it's kind of the ultimate narcissism in a sense of, all right, this robot doesn't rub me the wrong way because I've created it in my image. So yeah, some deep stuff there, and I think something our churches can definitely lean into. So we've talked about maybe that positive aspect of leaning into in-person actual connection. But then what are some of the dangers that you see, maybe some things that the church should note as these things roll out to the people in the pew? Hey, you need to be thinking about this.
I think the danger is going to be moderation. If we're not showing moderation with the way that we're using it, then we will become completely enraptured in another world that doesn't exist. And we will, in some ways, be less human because we're not interacting with the folks that the Lord has, given us or put us together in real life with, right? So I think that that's going to be one of the things. And I think from a pastoral perspective, we're going to see a lot of people that are solving their own problems through AI. An AI counselor is one of the top reasons, right, that people are using it. And I will say, like, I teach an ethics class in our school here. I teach biblical worldviews. I've created my own bot around biblical worldviews, diagnosing ethical situations through the framework or paradigm of a Christian perspective. And it does a great job. Like, I can use that personally and learn from it. But a lot of the people that will be using them as counselors haven't programmed it, right? Haven't trained it on a Christian worldview. I think for many pastors, it's going to be really important that our folks don't head in a direction that they shouldn't head because of the influence of their personal AI. And there are ways to do that, right? I think number one, like, pastors should get into AI even if you don't like it, even if you think it's stupid, even if you think it's not useful. There's an evolution of understanding that has to happen. Like, you're not going to learn it. You're not going to turn it on today and learn it in 1 week. There's to fully grasp its potential and fully grasp what it actually does, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time using it. And the quicker pastors can figure this out, the quicker they can maybe head off some of these problems, or even be able to diagnose some of these problems intellectually, like within their congregation, before they become bigger problems.
So I was thinking also of model poisoning. Who's watching the people that are putting in the algorithms and training when somebody asks ChatGPT, is there a God, that it is a fairly neutral or favorable theistic answer. And thus far, it seems like most of those things have been done well. Mm-hmm. But certainly you could see, maybe you take a place like China that's outlawing Christianity, they're definitely going to be plugging into their artificial intelligence that there is no God.
It's true.
And so I love what you're saying about discipleship. Effective discipleship in the coming years is going to require base knowledge of what's going on, so you can warn and guide people in this space.
Yeah, and the great thing about ChatGPT, well, all of them, I haven't tried DeepSeek yet, is that they're all very evangelical. And the reason for that is because the body of authors and books that have been written over the past, we can go ahead and say 2,000 years, completely overwhelms any of the new kind of philosophy books that have been written within the past 100 years. And the first model that was developed was actually trained on the Bible. So at its very core, AI has been trained on the Bible. And the reason for that is because the Bible has been translated in the most languages, and even within those languages, there are different versions that tie back into the original languages. So it's the perfect way to train a model on the universality of language and of thought. And so at its core, there's some kind of spiritual connection. There's some kind of logical, biblical connection to every LLM. But we do have to be careful, because there will be people that will try to twist it and remove things from it so that it's giving a more equitable answer. But I think what we're seeing today is people want guardrails off. They don't want, I think Rock is representing this the best. They don't want any constraints. They want to be able to talk to it the way they want to talk to it, and not have anyone tell them, hey, you can't talk about these kinds of things.
So as we've talked, just kind of cemented something that I've been thinking through, and that is a coming identity crisis. Not that we don't have one already, but if you lose your job in a factory to a robot, or if you're over-the-road truck driver, that hasn't gone as quickly as we thought perhaps, but walking with people through that, and it's akin to what we have faced before, but this isn't being edged out by a human coworker. I mean, it's being replaced and feeling like, what skills or use do I have? So I think the church is so well stationed to jump in and to serve people in what's coming. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
We've gone through a number of issues. Any particular thing that I might have missed, or something you'd like to mention to the audience?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of things coming within the next 5 years, and I can't overemphasize the need for people to learn this and get into this world, especially adults, mature Christians, because our next generation will need some guidance. They'll need help. They'll need us to be able to talk their language in a way that makes sense. And the more that we can learn it, the better for everybody. I will say, in 2025, you're talking about people losing their jobs, and that's definitely going to happen, right? Within the next 2 years, I think Elon says he's going to be mass producing nearly 500,000 of his bots every year. They're going to eventually make their way into homes, and people will, likely be losing their job as a result. Who knows how long that will take, But one of the interesting things around this is that Elon is wanting to get the price of each one of his robots to be something cheaper than $10,000, so that robot serves you or takes care of your house during the day, and at night it actually goes out and runs Amazon errands, runs Uber, does things to earn you money while you sleep. So the future is going to be so crazy in that every household will have their own robot that will serve them, and when it has time, it will go and make money for that particular household. And you'll hear people talking about how this is going to triple the productivity without adding more homes or more people. That's why.
Wow.
So I say that to kind of overshoot just a bit and help people realize there's a ton of things that are going to happen, and the best that we can, come to grips with it, understand it through the lens of Scripture, and use these tools positively, the better.
I'm into that. Well, it's certainly given us a lot to think about. Maybe stay up tonight thinking about. No, but I think we have to trust the Lord, as Christians have always had to do, and find our identity in Christ. And these developments certainly emphasize that. Well, Dave, if you had a billboard on which you could put a message to the church, what would you put on it? And I think you've talked about a lot of this already, but any just kind of final summary thoughts?
I think that churches should understand that they are about preaching, but they're also about relationships. And whatever we can do to build a church of relationships and emphasize connection, belonging, and all the fruits of the Spirit being exhibited with fellow members, I think the better. Because this will be a dying art, talking to people in real life and talking about your problems. And I think this is one way where the church can really step in. I do have a couple books that I'd recommend parents and others to read. One is called Know Thy Gamer, A Parent's Guide to Video Games. This will help you understand how they're being used by teens. It's where I got the statistics, 70% of teens play video games for the social interaction. Another is called Gaming in the Heroic Life, A Quest for Holiness in the Virtual World. This will explain the reason why humans have a desire to play video games and achieve inside of video games. And I'll just kind of leave it open like that. There's a YouTube channel around God and gaming that is really interesting. And then John Lennox, kind of lastly, is a theologian, apologist. He teaches at Oxford. He teaches math, I believe, at Oxford. He's written a book called 2048 and the AI Revolution. 2084 and the AI Revolution. And it's a tremendous book on viewing all of these revolutionary changes through the lens of Scripture and through the lens of what the Bible has to say about life. And it's a thick book. It's a heady book. There's some YouTube videos of him talking about it. But for those that are really deep thinkers and want to dive into it, I would recommend John Lennox.
Those are excellent resources, and we will link those in the show notes. And Dave, we look forward to staying in contact with you as we all navigate what's going on. Look forward to maybe having you back in the future as these things roll out and we all have our personal assistants. So thank you so much. We appreciate your expertise and how you're serving the body of Christ through it. So thanks for being on today.
Thanks, Josh, for having me.